This is Block 7, The Greatest Generation, Section 2, The Rise of the Dictators, with the section beginning with Benito Mussolini. Here's Mussolini, as in his early 30s. Mussolini was a world-famous progressive socialist before World War I. He was known to all of Europe's socialists and left-wing progressives and communists as being highly educated, very excellent speaker, an urbane and sophisticated man. His great lesson that he learned in World War I was that socialism could never be international. That the idea of all the workers of the world uniting together and throwing off the chains of their employers and the bosses and the capitalists would not happen. Because Mussolini saw the working men of France, England, Germany, Russia, Italy marching off to war happily in 1914, slaughtering the working men of other countries, and he said, you know what the great mistake of communism is? Mussolini said, the great mistake of communism is assuming that it's international. And Mussolini then took to take progressive economic ideas of cooperation between capital, labor, and business and government, and focus them and add them to nationalistic feelings. And he set about creating what he called national socialism. All right? So, what happened? He was an Italian. Italy after World War I is a mess. It's corrupt, it's inefficient, it's led by kind of a pathetic monarchy with a pathetic liberal democratic representative body. And he took his plan, he turned socialism inward and focuses the economics of progressivism, focuses the economics on progressivism and merges them with a strong nationalistic feeling. He calls it National Socialism, and he calls it fascism. We're going to see fascism in a second. Italy had been on the winning side of the war, but nothing was going good after the war. In 1922, Mussolini takes his shock troopers, his so-called black shirts, that all of these dictators kind of created their own private armies and would battle it out in the streets, you know, for control, for elections, etc., etc. In 1922, Mussolini takes his black shirts and has what's known as the March on Rome. In 1922, he marches on Rome. And because he's the strongest, guy in the street, the king gives him the power to the Italian state. After which Mussolini sets about creating this National Socialist Society. And he does so to the applause of most non-communist progressives. That in the 1920s, before he was determined to be bad, he was very popular amongst progressive circles in the United States and the rest of the world. He set to making the Italian economy more efficient. He set about to this great plan. And his form of government is what he proudly called fascism. Now, fascism comes from the Latin word fasces, which means a bundle of sticks. And the best way to think of fascism is to consider sticks. One single stick. If I had a single stick and I just exerted force on it, it would snap pretty easily. But if I took those sticks and took 100 of them and bundled them up and then tried to snap it, it would be impossible. The idea here is that strength comes from unity, and that in a fascist country, everyone has to be on the same page. Everyone has to be working to the same plan. That liberal democracy is clearly a failure. All of the rights about liberal democracy, about freedom of the press and freedom of speech and the rights of minorities, etc., all these things are doing is preventing everyone from working together as one. And if everyone is an individual little stick, all those little individual sticks can be snapped easily and at will. The only way to make a country strong, the only way to make a society successful is to get everybody bundled up in one strong package, one strong fasci. And that's where the term fascist comes from. It is a word that is difficult to define, because after World War II, all fascism came to mean was anyone that progressives and communists did not like. Fascism was a term associated with Germany and Italy during the war, so it became a pretty negative term. Nowadays, when someone is called a fascist, they're just being called a nasty name. But in 1922 and 1925 and 1932, fascism did not have this negative connotation. In fact, it was celebrated by most progressives. Mussolini's definition, I think, is the best. Or it's not necessarily the best, but it's the most succinct. It's the easiest way for you to remember and consider when you think of what fascism is. And what Mussolini said, and was celebrated for it, was everything within the state, nothing outside of the state. That everybody would work with the Italian government to produce a better, wealthier, more just Italy. It has the typical progressive promise of economic cooperation between business, labor, and government. Business and labor were free to do what they wanted to do as long as they followed the rules set down by the Italian government, which always had a plan. There was a plan for this business, a plan for that business, and if you operated within the plan, you could operate freely, but you could not operate outside the plan, because if you operated outside the plan, then by definition, you were one of those single sticks that made the society and the country around you weaker. You add that economic cooperation, add to that an extreme nationalism. Mussolini purposely set out to create a second Roman Empire. A nationalism so strong that the state replaces God. Mussolini started to look somewhat ridiculous. He would put on his military uniform, he would give these grand, speeches. He had this big booming voice. He was a big guy, big strong guy. But for a long time, people ate this up. So let's just consider fascism. Everything inside the state, nothing outside the state. If you are outside the state will destroy you. The state will work to destroy any institutions outside of its control, whether they're independent labor unions, independent newspapers, independent political parties. They are clearly not behind the plan. The plan is what is going to lead to societal success, and if you're not behind the plan, there's clearly something wrong with you. Mussolini was its first practitioner on the world power stage, and he is going to run Italy until the Italian people deposed him in 1943.